Okay, so we did our study on the relationship between religion and sexuality. We looked at sexual permissiveness, sexual self-esteem, sexual preoccupation, and BDSM and kink. For my literature review over sexual permissiveness, essentially all of the articles I looked at, all of the literature reviews, everyone found essentially the same finding in that there was significant differences between the level of sexuality and your religion. So those who were more religious tended to have less sexual desires, less sexual behavior, and less, more strict views on sexual permissiveness in general.
Both Abbott et al. And Myers et al. Provided definitions of sexual self-esteem, which included references to evaluations of one's own value and competence as a sexual being. Prior research has suggested that sexual self-esteem has major implications on many areas of an individual's sex life. Furthermore, it's been suggested that an individual's level of religiosity may affect aspects of their sexual self-esteem. As Myers et al. Said, sexual self-esteem can be both damaged and improved by the self and others. Damage can be inflicted through insulting sexual comments, verbal abuse, sexual harassment, sexual assault, and uncharacteristic sexual behavior. Many religions define what is acceptable sexual behaviors. When religious individuals participate in sexual encounters that are unacceptable in their religion, problems with sexual self-esteem may arise. Honeyer et al. Found that a woman's BMI has no significant effect on their sexual self-esteem. However, it was noted that a sense of femininity is important to women and their sexual self-esteem. The more feminine a woman felt, the higher their sexual self-esteem. This is important to note because religion often emphasizes differences between the sexes and assigns masculine and feminine roles. This may lead to a heightened sense of femininity, which may cause religious women to perceive themselves as more feminine overall. In turn, this increases their sexual self-esteem. Oates et al. Found that sexual self-esteem was a predictor of sexual communication. Individuals with higher sexual self-esteem are more likely to have better sexual communication than individuals with lower sexual self-esteem. Good sexual communication can improve overall sexual satisfaction and relationship satisfaction. A Menard et al. Study found that participants with higher sexual self-esteem reported experiencing greater sexual satisfaction compared to participants with lower sexual self-esteem. Furthermore, their study found that the relationship between sexual self-esteem and sexual satisfaction was partially mediated by sexual assertiveness. Abbott et al. Found that religious commitment was not significantly correlated with overall sexual self-esteem. However, religious commitment did negatively impact some aspects of sexual self-esteem. If religion impacts any aspect of sexual self-esteem, it could have the potential to affect sexual communication, sexual satisfaction, and relationship satisfaction.
Studying masturbation, pornography, and sexual preoccupation, I found that mainly the literature focused on masturbation and pornography. So first, I looked at 20th century attitudes towards masturbation and studied Michael S. Patton's analysis of Judeo-Christian attitudes, which found that based upon a religious culture, masturbation is heavily stigmatized in that culture. Based upon that, I looked at contemporary attitudes in masturbation, pornography, and religion, and Samuel L. Perry and George M. Hayward, as well as Zeynep Sumer, found that religious individuals engage in less masturbatory behaviors than non-religious individuals. They also found significant sex differences when examining differences in masturbation and pornography use, with male individuals masturbating and watching pornography to a greater level than females. However, when looking at Google and religious attitudes toward pornography, Kara C. McInnes and Gordon Hodgson studied this by looking at conservative and liberal states. And they studied the Google history trends for pornography use. And they found that conservative states engaged in search for more pornography than liberal states. This makes sense, though, when looking at Robert Patterson and Joseph Price's study, who did find differences in religious behaviors towards masturbation pornography, with them reporting less lower levels of masturbation pornography consumption. However, they theorize that religious individuals engage in the same level of masturbatory and pornography consumption as non-religious individuals, but since it is so heavily stigmatized, they report lower levels of pornography consumption than non-religious individuals.
For the BDSM aspect of the literature review, I looked at several studies. Arnold 2011 discusses religiosity and how to measure it, as well as the different types of religiosity, and also discusses the 4 domains of religiosity. This is also discussed in Hunt from 2009. Ellison 2011 discusses the morality of sex in Christian teachings, and also defines religiosity as the role of importance of religion in one's life, and sometimes referred to as religious orientation. It also discusses what religion is and what it means to people who practice it. It also discusses the evolution of the relationship between Christianity and sexuality, and how it went from a neutral relationship to a negative one, as well as the growing support of abstinence within the church. Hunt 2009 discusses the relationship between religion and sex within other religions such as Judaism and Hinduism. This is also discussed in Daniluk 2008. Daniluk also discusses how religious teachings provide a framework for what we view as right and wrong, and how that changes the way we view sex and sexuality. Runkle from 1998 discusses how fear is an integral part of religion, and how as the fear of nature subsided, there needed to be a new fear to replace it.
For our methods section, for sexual permissiveness, I use the revised sociosexual orientation inventory, which is otherwise known as the SOIR. This was made by Pinky and Assendorf in 2008. The SOIR is a 9-point Likert scale that forms to create the behavior, attitude, and desire facets. Items 1, 2, and 3 average to form the behavior. Items 4, 5, and 6 average to form the attitude. And items 7, 8, and 9 average to form the desire facet. Item 6 is reverse coded. In our study, it was projected that I would use a two-way ANOVA to compare the differences between the independent variables of gender identity and religion to the dependent variable of sexual permissiveness.
Participants provided answers to the 10-question sexual self-esteem subscale of the sexuality scale, which measured the participants' levels of sexual self-esteem by use of a 5-point Likert scale, where 1 equaled agree and 5 equaled disagree. Items 4, 5, 7, 9, 10 were reverse scored. A one-way ANOVA was used to compare the differences between sexual self-esteem scores of religious and non-religious participants.
When analyzing the sexuality scale, we use the same scale as from Storm Papini as the self-esteem scale, except it measures sexual preoccupation. These questions were formed on a 5-point Likert scale, and they were scored from 0 to 40, with 20 being an average level of sexual preoccupation. Questions 3, 7, 8, 9, and 10 were reverse scored. And we analyzed the sexual preoccupation scale, and we analyzed gender as well as religiosity using a two-way ANOVA. When studying the assertment of participation in masturbation and pornography use, a two-way chi-square was used to analyze gender and religious differences when looking at the nominal questions. However, an independent sample C-test was used to analyze the question in the past 4 weeks, how many times have you masturbated, alone as it is operated on a continuous scale.
For the BDSM aspect, I used the same preoccupation of masturbation and pornography scale. I only looked at one question, which was, do you participate in BDSM activities, which was a yes or no question. The other question I looked at was, are you religious? And that was also a yes or no question. I used a chi-square analysis to look at the responses, and then used a one-way ANOVA test to look at those responses as well.
Before we move on to our results, we also have the procedure for our methods section. We posted a recruitment ad and a survey link on Reddit and shared it through the BSU Comm Center. All participants were ages 18 to 25 and were prompted to fill out an informed consent. After they were done completing the survey, participants were prompted to exit. For our results section, you can see in the first table the descriptive statistics showing the amount of people that answered each of our surveys in the subscales that we had them, and all of our minimum and maximum numbers as far as our range goes. For sexual permissiveness, specific to my subscale, a total average was not taken because we had to take out items 4 through 6. However, an average was still taken on the behavior and desire facet. We got a chi-square of 0.84 and 0.88 respectively, which was in line with what the SOIR had to say about both of these facets. Instead of like originally anticipated, we did not use a two-way ANOVA. Instead, we used an independent samples t-test to compare the means of the behavior and desire facets compared to the means of the participants who answered if they were religious or not. We did find significant differences, however, only in the behavior facet. although both behavior and desire facets moved in the direction that we thought they would.
Religious and non-religious participants' mean scores on the sexual self-esteem subscale were compared using a one-way ANOVA. Our hypothesis that there would be no significant difference between religious and non-religious individuals' mean scores on the sexual self-esteem subscale was supported since the p-value for each question was greater than 0.05, as you can see in this table that I've created right here.
So our hypothesis was that there would be significant gender and religious differences in individuals' level of sexual preoccupation. And another hypothesis we had were there be significant gender and religious differences in individuals' levels of masturbation and pornography use. However, our finding was that there was no significant gender and religious differences in individuals' levels of sexual preoccupation. And there's only one significant religious difference regarding an individual's consumption of X-rated movies. And there's only one significant sex differences between male and females masturbation habits in a month.
Our hypothesis was that we would find that religious individuals were less likely to participate in BDSM activities. And this did correspond to our findings, which was that religious individuals were less likely to participate in BDSM activities with a p-value of less than or equal to 0.05. Yeah.
For our discussion section on implications for further research in sexual permissiveness, further researchers could look at any two different populations besides religious and non-religious individuals. This could be populations such as gender identity and race differences.
Future researchers may also seek to determine if there are gender differences in sexual self-esteem. Furthermore, determining if there are differences in sexual self-esteem between religious males and females could allow researchers to potentially discover an interrelationship between gender and religion's effects on sexual self-esteem.
It would be helpful to ask more questions pertaining to specific masturbation habits because this would help differentiate gender and religious differences, as the questions we did ask were nominal in nature and did not offer much detail in terms of masturbation and pornography habits, and differentiate and see those religious and gender differences that literature review found.
For the BDSM aspect, more in-depth analysis would be better, more questions, and also looking at more variables such as their gender and age, as well as the types of religions that they have and their levels of religiosity. It'd also be benefit from a more diverse sample of religious individuals, as well as more racially diverse. And it would be good if they looked at ages and the age differences. The limitations for our study were that questions 4, 5, and 6 from the SOIR were not analyzed because the Likert scale answer choices used for those questions were incorrect when compared to prior use of the scale. We also had a lopsided participant pool. Participants chose to skip all of the questions from certain scales, making results for those scales less generalizable.
Findings in the current study can help break down social norms and stigmas, and this study can also be used to understand the way that religious individuals feel morally about BDSM. Learning how religious individuals feel morally about BDSM will allow us to know how to best educate and inform them about BDSM and its beliefs and practices.
In conclusion, for sexual permissiveness, most individuals have some sort of sexual desire regardless of religious affiliation. When I said earlier that both moved in the direction that we had anticipated, this is what I mean by that, and that desire also has some sort of effect on an individual. However, not all individuals behave according to their desires.
As expected, due to Abbott et al.'s 2016 findings, there were no significant differences between religious and non-religious individuals' sexual self-esteem.
There was no significant differences in sexual preoccupation when comparing gender and religious differences, which was unexpected as the literature did have significant differences in masturbation pornography use, which was theorized to affect levels of sexual preoccupation. However, there was no significant gender differences when comparing nominal measures of masturbatory behavior, which could be because of the way the questions were worded. And the only significant gender difference is the number of times an individual masturbates in a month, which is expected according to the literature to find significant differences between male levels of masturbatory behavior and female levels of masturbatory behavior. And there is no significant religious differences except when comparing their behaviors towards watching X-rated movies, which is inconsistent with literature as well. However, more in-depth questions may help this in the future.
For the BDSM aspect, we did find a significant difference between BDSM participation between religious and non-religious groups, and that with the religious group being less likely to participate in BDSM activities, this is also supported by our previous literature.